Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see so many faces here again. For some of you, this is already day 4 of the conference, and I think that's quite a time span for one conference. So, and I'm also glad to see you all after this fabulous dinner last night, because we all know how it is to come to a conference after you had sort of fun and good drinks and food before, and so everyone's here in time. I'm delighted. My name is Herbert Grieshop. I'm in charge of international affairs at Freie Universität, and I'm your master of ceremony for today. Before we start and jump into the program, just one reminder for those of you who haven't seen the posters out there in the atrium, you know, the posters by our scholars, have a look. Today is your last opportunity to look at the posters, and I think it would be great to, you know, maybe there are some more interesting discussions. We do have this morning, again, the situation in Turkey here in the room, and we talked about it yesterday already when we gave the awards to Academics for Peace, and it's a big topic here today, our panel discussion, which we have soon here. But before we start with the panel discussion, we also have a scholar from Turkey, a scholar voice, and I would like to introduce him briefly to you. It is Dr. Zafer Yilmaz. He's a political scientist from Ankara University and who's currently visiting he's a visiting scholar at the Center for Citizenship, Social Pluralism and Religious Diversity at Potsdam University. He studied at Middle East Technical University and Ankara University, and he also did some research stays abroad in Berkeley and Brunel, but also particularly, I'm proud of that, at Freie Universität Berlin. His current work is concerned with the rise of authoritarianism, the transformation of the rule of law, with citizen issues, but he's also published a book on the concept of risk and poverty alleviation policies of the World Bank and several papers on various social policies. So I would like to ask you to come to the stage, Dr. Yilmaz.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and so thank you very much for everyone coming today here. I would like to very shortly talk about what's going on in Turkey and also what the Turkish case is saying to us. Maybe you all know that what happened in Turkey after the declaration of the petition for peace, and you know that Turkish scholars signed a petition which is named as "We Will Not Party to This Crime." After this petition, more than 500 scholars lost their jobs, and after the failed coup, governments expelled more than 500 scholars. In total, more than 110,000 public employees. And just I would like to ask very specific questions with you today. It's a Turkish case, a very striking example of violations of academic rights and freedoms, actually. It's a clear example of imposition of the order of politics, we can say, into the order of knowledge, and imposition of the reason of state, actually. So, if you look at the Turkish case, what's going on actually in Turkish case, we can say that it is not unique to Turkey, actually. It's this imposition of the authoritarian mentality into our universities is not unique to Turkey. It's not culturally specific or country specific. It's a global issue. So it occurred to me another question, and we should raise another question, I think. The question which I would like to raise today is why such an authoritarian policy is actually working. So why our institutions are failing so easily, actually, against authoritarian mentality, and why were they so fragile against authoritarian intervention? The most important question for me. So I think part of the answer lies in the very structure of the dominant power relation within our universities. Also, part of the answer lies in the way our universities has been governed. So we can clearly understand why authoritarian leaders try to impose their mentality into universities, but it's much more difficult to understand why it's working in our university system. And in that case, to understand that the answer to that question, I think we should look again into inside of our universities and internal structure of our universities again. So, what are the reasons which is strengthening the working of such a mentality, such a logic of power within our universities in that sense? If you look at our universities, And then you can see that the constant precarization of the working conditions or the internal regulations of the power relations of how the universities are governed, which opens the entrance of such a clear authoritarian mentality to our universities more and more. It happened in the Turkish case very well. If you look at how the whole university system has been organized in an authoritarian way, you can see how such a mentality opened the door to intrusion of such an authoritarian intervention into the Turkish universities. Almost all universities has been under control of higher education board in Turkey. It made it so fragile in Turkish university system, and then it's opened the door to an authoritarian intervention so easily. Hence, I can say that what Alexis Tocqueville said about the Ancien regime just more than 200 years ago is also right about our university system as well. Because, I mean, they are collapsing, they are easily collapsing against authoritarian intervention because there's already strong problems within the universities as well. And we can say that they are collapsing because they have been already decayed and rotten inside, so that the authoritarian intervention working very well and much more easily affecting the lives of our colleagues, our students at the same time too. So what we need to do, I think it is much more easy to defend academic freedoms against such an authoritarian mentality or tyrants or dictators or authoritarian interventions. But it seems to me, it's much more difficult to establish democratic relations within the universities, with the students, with the colleagues, with every members of the university. So what we need to do, what Turkish case shows us in that sense, actually. So what we need to do, first of all, we have to find a way to create and to build an academic community which is ready to fight again for the academic rights and freedoms, of course. We have to build solidarity networks as Scholar at Risk and other institutions, Humboldt Foundation and other institutions pushing for. We should also reject any kind of relationship with the institutions which is violating seriously academic rights and freedoms, as in the Turkish case as well. So we have to create a strong academic community, international community, which is dedicated to defend academic rights and freedoms. So just a last verse, I don't have too much time. All in all, I can say that, as I see in the Turkish case, the problem of university is directly related with building a free, just, and equal society. So I think it's the same in everywhere, in USA, in Hungary, in everywhere. In that case, it's time to give a strong sign to these authoritarian leaders that we are ready to defend the idea of university, we are ready to defend our colleagues, and we are ready to defend academic rights and freedoms again. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Dr. Yilmaz. I mean, in a way, that was a perfect introduction into what we're going to do now, because you gave us sort of the internal perspective of what it means to be a university in an authoritarian country, and what are the conditions and what one could do against it. And we have now a panel discussion that's called Friends Forever, How to Assist and Continue Working with Scholars and Universities in Turkey. So we're talking about what we can do from the outside and what we can do in terms of our relations with international universities. And that's an issue, I can tell you, we have discussed at this university over the last 2 or 3 years more than once. I mean, how do you deal with universities that are in such a special situation? So therefore, I'm delighted to have a very interesting panel here. But I have a moderator who I don't have to introduce to you because he has been here on stage a couple of times. So Rob Quinn is going to introduce the 3 panelists, and then we have a discussion here on stage, but also a discussion with the audience later. So I would ask the 4 of you to come to the stage. Thank you.
Wherever you like. Good morning, everyone. So, in yesterday's sessions and at last night's dinner, which really was wonderful, wasn't it? We recognized the really challenging situation in Turkey. We remember now that that situation is not just a challenge for the individual scholars who are targeted, it's really a challenge for all Turkish institutions, for all of Turkish higher education, and for all of us in the international sector who value our relationships and partnerships in Turkey. How can we support Turkish higher education at this time? How can we maintain our contacts and our programs without becoming complicit in the negative actions taking place? In other words, how do we continue to engage with Turkey while remaining true to the core higher education values that we've been talking about these last 4 days? We have a number of distinguished panelists to help us talk this through. Each is involved in efforts to assist Turkey or to assist Turkish scholars or institutions or to engage with Turkish partners in different ways. I'd like to introduce all three of them, and then they'll each have a chance to present their thoughts, and then we'll have a discussion, okay? So first will be Dr. Kader Konuk, the professor and chair of Turkish Studies at the University of Duisburg-Essen here in Germany. She's a long-term scholar of Exile and prize-winning author of East-West Mimesis, Auerbach in Turkey. She's also the director of the newly founded Academy in Exile, located in Berlin and Essen. With funding from the Volkswagen Foundation, the Academy provides a forum for continued engagement with questions of religious and ethnic diversity, gender and sexuality, and civic engagement for peace, democracy, citizenship, and human rights. In its first funding round, fellowships were offered to scholars from Turkey with the aim of stimulating Turkish studies and promoting wider debate about authoritarian movements and threats to academic freedom. Next, we will have Laura Batalla Adam, the Secretary General of the European Parliament Turkey Forum, a cross-party, non-partisan platform composed of 60 members of the European Parliament, which promotes high-level discussions between the European and Turkish officials, political decision makers, experts, and civil society actors. The aim of the forum is to advance a well-informed debate on issues related to EU-Turkey relations while serving as a bridge between Turkey and the EU. Laura is a political analyst and commentator specializing in European affairs and EU-Turkey relations. She's published policy and research papers for renowned think tanks, specialized publications in academic journals, as well as opinion pieces in European and Turkish newspapers. And finally, Monika Steinel is the policy analyst at the European University Association, and I'm grateful to say an alumnus of these Scholars at Risk Congresses, where Monika supports the Secretary General in overall policy development and association management. She previously worked as the project officer on EUA's Governance, Autonomy and Funding Unit, where she focused on the Autonomy Scorecard project, a really extraordinary effort to map autonomy in Europe and compares autonomy across Europeans' different higher education systems. So we have a really marvelously accomplished panel to help us navigate through the rather difficult questions we have of continuing to work with and support our Turkish partners. So, please.
Thank you very much, Rob, for introducing us and inviting us to this fabulous conference. 4 days was just the right amount of time to be able to have all these conversations, and I'm very happy to be able to present my work today. I'll have a bit of concept at the beginning that I will read, and then I'll talk you through the structure and the history of the Academy in Exile. The current flight of academics begs the question of how to respond to the crisis other than in humanitarian ways. In the first section, I want to reflect on Said, who had once termed the phrase "the executive value of exile." What we might ask is the redeeming feature of exile today. Is there something we can learn from the past? How can we respond in ways and help curtail the rise of anti-academism and populism, not only in Turkey but also in Poland, Hungary, and also the United States? In 1943, Hannah Arendt warned that outlawing the Jewish people in Europe was closely followed by the outlawing of most European nations. Refugees, driven from country to country, she said, represent the vanguard of their peoples, if they keep their identity. For Arendt, the assimilated Jew who constantly looked for approval was the counterpart to the conscious pariah who was the vanguard of their peoples. Traditionally, the figure of exile and the refugee is not necessarily associated with the exile, so the refugee is not associated with the exile. As if, following a class division, we imagine the refugee to be less educated and the exile or émigré to have valuable cultural and intellectual capital. In fact, Arendt's essay starts by acknowledging that, quote, we don't like to be called refugees. We ourselves call each other newcomers or immigrants, end of quote. She points out that the refugee is understood as a person driven to seek refuge because of some act committed or some political opinion held. According to Arendt, the Jewish committee rejects identification with the refugee because, quote, we committed no acts and most of us never dreamt of having any radical opinion, end of quote. In an act of self-criticism, her essay restores the identity of the refugee by connecting it to the image of the conscious pariah. In the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, Edward Said took up the question of the intellectual in exile and gave his well-known Wreath lectures in 1993 on displacement and the condition of marginality. Said's interest did not primarily lie in the present, but in the displacement caused by revolutions, fascism, deportation, and genocides in the first half of the 20th century. He was interested in the great masterpieces that Adorno, Auerbach, or Naipaul generated in exile. In Said's view, exilic displacement means for the intellectual being liberated from the usual career path. While he did not deny the challenges and hardships of exile, Said, in a vein similar to Arendt, emphasized the condition of marginality as the potential asset of the intellectual. To Said, the exilic intellectual, quote, does not respond to the logic of the conventional, but to the audacity of daring and to representing change, to moving on and not standing still, end of quote. For many contemporary critics, exile represents a state of critical detachment and superior insight that is supposed to arise when intellectuals are expelled from their homes and forced to take up residence elsewhere. It concerns me that this line of thought too readily reduces exile to a mere metaphor of uprootedness. Disconnected from his or her social and political context, the exile is coupled with possibilities for cultural transfer and transnational exchange. But too easily does the exilic condition acquire almost utopian possibilities. The exile is suddenly unencumbered by his or her background, emerging instead as the new mediator between systems, a perspicuous commentator on both the endogenous and the exogenous. To me, this view of exile distorts the historical record, and I don't think it's true for today either. So I ask what it means actually to go into exile and what arises therefrom, and that was my starting point when I started the conversations with exilic intellectuals from Turkey in 2016. But I quickly go back to Said and connect him to Agamben. Giorgio Agamben revisited Arendt's essay in 1995 and wrote an article using Arendt's same title, the original title, We Refugees. Here, Agamben shows no interest in the question of the intellectual in exile, but discusses the status of the refugee. He sees the refugee as nothing less than a border concept that radically calls into question the principles of the nation-state and at the same time helps clear the field for a no longer delayable renewal of categories. That was a quote from Agamben. The background that informs Agamben's re-evaluation of the status of the refugee is the collapse of the Soviet Union. So you can see every intellectual has a different historical and political context from which they talk from, and the outbreak of ethnic violence in former Yugoslavia. Rather than romanticizing the potential of the refugee, Arendt's conscious pariah, Agamben calls for, quote, reconstructing our political philosophy beginning with this unique figure. And I want to end here to just give you an idea like where I'm coming from academically and I already did my work on exile historically when I then was faced with the exile of my colleagues from Turkey starting in January 2016 with the peace academics there were about 100 of them at least who arrived in Germany alone in 2016. So I started having meetings with my exiled colleagues from Turkey, who some of them had already, like Nil Mutluer, for example, who spoke 2 days ago, is one of the founders of the Academy in Exile, was part of the first conversations that we had, and I asked them how they actually wanted to shape their time here in Turkey, here in Germany, and how to, because my interest is not in keeping them in a position as a victim and seeing them just as a refugee, but give them the agency to shape their own exile. So this is how we started. We had several conversations around my dinner table with about 10 people that floated, and they were floating different ideas, and at the same time the Volkswagen Foundation put out a call that they would be willing to support refugee academics if one had a Volkswagen project already. I approached Volkswagen and asked, look, we have a group, and I'm really interested in keeping a cohort and working on something that is that foregrounds the knowledge that needs to be preserved in exile, and not just give out humanitarian stipends. So after I contacted Volkswagen and we had very promising conversations, I went back to my university, to the Kulturwissenschaftliches Institut, where Volker Heinz, my colleague, is, and to Georges Khalil here at the Forum Transregionale Studien, and we started conceptualizing a project that we call Academy in Exile, where we have 2 cohorts working in 2 different locations. The one is at the Kulturwissenschaftliches Institut in Essen, that has different, it's basically in the located basically linking social sciences and the humanities. And the Forum Transregionale Studien that is well known for its YUMI project. Many working on the Middle East will know it, Europe and the Middle East and Europe, it's called, and they already have a program that allows people working on the Middle East and from the Middle East to come in and work for a year here in Berlin. So that's a fantastic network for specifically Turkish academics to be working in as well. We have, this is our structure. We created a council with 5 of us who are at German institutes of higher education. Among them is also Klaus Leggevi, who was the director of the Kulturwissenschaftliches Institut at the time, and Friederike Pannewick, who's a professor for Arabic studies in Marburg. We have now a collegium that is that enables the exiled colleagues who are already here to be part of the Academy in Exile as active members, and they were part of the selection committee when we put out a call for applications. So that's basically half-half. And we have now 9 long-term fellows who can stay for 2 years, and we also give out bridge stipends as a kind of emergency measure for those who run out of visas, need some time to write up another application. This was our call for application. We put it out in October last year, and we had not quite expected how many applications we would get. We had a particular focus. We said the first round of fellowships should just be targeted towards the Turkish academics that are mostly at need. Our next call will be more open to other countries, but the first one we decided we need to respond to this urgent crisis. And we have a focus, so we don't have a disciplinary focus. We have chosen social sciences and the humanities and law, but we didn't then pick departments that would fit. But we have another requirement that distinguishes us from other institutions, which is the civic or the academic engagement with peace and democracy and human rights. And this allows us to create a cohort from different disciplines that are naturally connecting over the issues. We have then, because we got for 6 fellowships, we received 126 applications. We were completely overwhelmed. And then we started asking around for more support. We were able to partner with Scholar Rescue Fund and match stipends in a way that we have 2 Scholar Rescue Fund scholars among the 9, and the Freudenberg Stiftung also supports us. The Wissenschaftskolleg has a coordinator for us here in Berlin, and we have a coordinator in Essen as well. This is the shocking number of the ratio between the fellowships that we had available and the ones that we had to decline. And the third column is something that I hadn't quite figured out when we were applying to Volkswagen, all the children and the partners who come with the academics. So it's not only that we engage with the academics, but we also have to take in consideration that they all have their stories. They have children that are sick, they are pregnant and give birth while they are here. They come by themselves. They sometimes have partners who come. So these profiles, these personal profiles, is something that I didn't quite think about when we wrote up our application. We give the fellows of the Academy the possibility to either be out as an Academy in Exile fellow or to be affiliated only with the KWI in Essen or the Forum Transregionale Studien. So we don't out them. They can affiliate themselves openly with the Academy in Exile. And I just want to show you the kind of the spread of the PhDs that it's not really well done. We have to improve the slide. But to see where the PhDs were done. And what we saw, the 9 who received the long-term fellowships are those who were, most of them, we realized later, were already academics who are quite mobile, internationally already recognized, and we selected the fellows according to academic merit and to risk. So what then happened is that we actually have more fellows who have international PhDs than I had thought in the beginning, but it makes total sense because these people are more able to leave or were able to leave before losing their job because they already had connections. So we are not, the problem of the travel ban is not such a big one among the group that we've chosen. These are the disciplines, and the model is of the Academy in Exile is really to keep a cohort around of different disciplines where people are academic or civically engaged with issues of human rights and democracy. And these are the disciplines that came together. We have one project that is very hopeful that might come into fruition with all the conversations that we've had, which is the Chateau de la Vigny of the Rowohlt Foundation, an immigrant family in Switzerland, who might be able to provide us with space for 6 months a year, and we could start a residence program there. I quickly want to look with you at this last slide, which is probably what the discussion is supposed to be about, which is what are the challenges that we are facing. Organizing security for Academy in Exile fellows and staff is one issue that we had to deal with because in the very beginning we got bad press from bad Turkish press, where we, the organizers, the members of the council, were named, and the newspaper, mainstream newspaper, claimed that we are supporting terrorism, PKK terrorism, as well as Gülen terrorism. So we need to talk about security. Then we have to respond to the constant attempt of the Turkish state, including the consulate, and I'm very used to it. I've seen this in my years in the US as well, that they come when there are critical issues like, of course, the Armenian genocide or anti-Semitism on the table. Then we kind of expect that representatives of the Turkish government are sometimes there in order to disrupt or criticize us. So that's ongoing in our project as well. We need to generate more support for, in terms of infrastructure and personnel. I've had the experience that foundations are very willing to give out, or are more willing to give stipends, but the real challenge is to have an infrastructure in place that allows this exilic work to come into fruition. Resolving visa issues, the threats of extradition. The trials have started, in December last year, and the first sentences were issued. We have one scholar who is on probation. He already got his sentence. Publishing and disseminating intellectual outputs is one of our aims. So only with the personnel we will be able to coach everybody to get into this post-fellowship phase where they can become independent of these refugee stipends. The issue, of course, cooperating with Turkish universities, that Zafer Yilmaz also already mentioned, is something that we constantly discuss. We want to extend the model of the Academy in Exile into other national contexts. And the last point is to create intellectual cohorts that would not play, but pay it forward. So how to connect refugee communities and exilic communities with each other and think about taking this forward. So I'll end here because my time is up. And thank you for listening, and of course I look forward to your questions.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here today to represent the European Parliament Turkey Forum, that, as you can guess, it's most probably the non-academic institution in the panel today. As it was explained before, we are a cross-party, non-partisan platform composed of 60 members of the European Parliament, which we have as an aim to advance a well-informed debate on issues relating to EU-Turkey relations. We organize high-level meetings between Turkish and European officials, political decision makers, experts, civil society, and business actors. And we are one of the most active groups of its kind in the European Parliament, as well as well-respected, and we have become an interlocutor with the other European Union institutions. The work that we do has become nowadays more important than ever. Through the forum, we have created, for example, a platform that enables members of the European Parliament and other EU officials to engage with Turkish officials in a debate or in a platform in which the two sides can address their concerns and find common grounds. We also work very closely with Turkish civil society and human rights defenders, and we strive to strengthen freedom, democracy, and respect for human rights in an effort to bring Turkey and the EU closer. In the last years, we have seen how Turkey has been distancing itself from the EU path, while at the same time we have also seen how the transformative power of the European Union has been lost due to the political blockages of the past. Academic freedom is one of the most affected areas in that sense, and it has already been said, it was already under restraint before the failed coup attempt in 2016. But it has only gotten worse after then. The European Union, I would like to remind, has strongly and very rapidly condemned the failed coup attempt, and it showed its full support to the democratic institutions in Turkey and solidarity with the Turkish people. While the EU, it's true that it has recognized Turkey's legitimate need to take swift action and proportionate action in face of such a threat, we have been very critical on the broad scale and collective nature, as well as the disproportionality of the measures taken under the state of emergency. The EU has repeatedly, since then, it's been nearly 2 years now, that the state of emergency is in place. And in the last report published by the European Commission a couple of weeks ago, this call is being made again. It's urgent to lift the state of emergency. In this report, they also show concern about the decrees taken under the state of emergency for not having been subject to an effective scrutiny by the Turkish parliament. These emergency decrees have notably curtailed civil and political rights, including freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and many other rights. The report is also, it pays particular attention to the situation of the signatories of the Academics for Peace petition. As you all know, as of the end of January 2018, 386 out of a total of more than 5,000 academics were expelled from 118 universities among the Academics for Peace, and many of them are now facing criminal charges. In this regard, the EU has been vocal, calling on Turkey to ensure that the existing legislation, in particular the anti-terror law, the criminal code, and the internet law, are revised to comply with European standards, and they are implemented in a manner that do not compromise freedom of expression. This requirement, by the way, is also a precondition for lifting the visa requirement for Turkish citizens. But coming to our point today, the Turkish academic community is under great pressure. there has been a shrinking space for research, education, and debate, and therefore there is an urgent need to safeguard academic freedom in Turkey. In order to find solutions, I think we should ask ourselves a couple of questions. How can we support academics that have lost their positions and cannot leave the country, both at the individual but as well at the institutional level? Or how can we increase opportunities in Europe for Turkish academics at risk? And finally, how can we support academic freedom through international collaboration with Turkish universities? We at the European Parliament Turkey Forum, we have been working to provide a space to discuss possible support mechanisms and strategies that the EU institutions can develop, both in an emergency setting like nowadays, but as well in the short and the long term, in order to support academics in Turkey. With this aim, we held our first closed-door meeting in October last year, to which we invited members of the European Parliament, other officials at the European Commission or the European External Action Service, Turkish academics, as well as representatives from universities, in order to respond to the three questions that I outlined before. And we came up with a series of recommendations that some of them have been already mentioned by Kader, but I wouldn't like to repeat myself, but I would like to go through all of them. The first recommendation would be to find ways to support academics who are not able to leave the country by, for example, creating remote or off-site fellowships and honorary affiliations. Another way could be to include Turkish academics in calls for papers all around Europe, or offering academics in Turkey distance education programs, or allowing them to deliver part-time courses and seminars using online platforms. And finally, engaging with the Solidarity Academies in Turkey that have been mentioned before by including them in international consortia. But then we have also the case of those academics who can indeed travel abroad, but we can, of course, invite them to participate in academic conferences all around Europe, all around the world, but we shouldn't expose them to unnecessary risk. This, I think, is a very important point. That's why what we have been doing in the European Parliament has always been in a confidential setting, not to necessarily put more under risk these academics or civil society activists. Point number 3 would be, it has already been mentioned before, to encourage European universities to host Turkish academics. Some of them are already doing this. We know the case of the Free University of Brussels, for example. ULB has created a Solidarity scholarship and is currently hosting Turkish academics, but also other academics under risk in many other countries. The thing is that we should create and strengthen those networks between European universities willing and able to create those scholarships for Turkish universities. As point number 4, we also discussed the possibility to create a mapping of existing initiatives and funds for scholars at risk in Turkey, established by different EU institutions or institutions at the European level. This is actually a project that has been ongoing. It's being tested at the moment, and we have been supporting it since the beginning. The aim of which is to develop an open source platform to gather all the funds available for endangered scholars in Turkey and to connect them with one another through this platform. By using interactive maps, it will be possible to search the funds according to the kind of discipline, the geographical location of the fund, the amount, the application deadline, the institution providing it, as well as the number of people who are already receiving this fund. Preliminary results show that most of the funds that have been allocated so far go to PhD holders, while master and PhD students receive them in a lesser extent. We've seen that as well. Universities and research institutions are the kind of organizations granting at least half of these funds, while the support coming from governments or at the local level is less than that. We've also seen that Germany is the country that has provided the majority of funds so far, followed by France. And all of these it's a workshop. It's being planned in the coming months in order to present these first results, and we hope that this will contribute to increase the number of academic exchanges and international collaborations. We also discussed during those meetings the importance of maintaining exchange programs and partnerships with Turkish universities. One paradigmatic case is the Erasmus. The Erasmus program, all of us know about it, has been one of the main success of the European Union, has also been active in Turkey since 2004. And since then, more than 500,000 Turkish citizens have benefited from projects under Erasmus+. The Erasmus program has also supported that more than 55,000 students and staff from the EU could travel, could study or teach in Turkey. Germany, again, has been the biggest sender of students and academics to Turkey, while Germany has also been the most popular destination by Turkish Erasmus students. But nowadays, we see that Turkey has become less and less attractive for European students, and there's a hesitation from the side of many universities in Europe to send students and staff to Turkey. We have seen this, we have been discussing with several universities. And for example, in Belgium, again, ULB is one of the few universities who is still sending and receiving Turkish students. So a greater effort needs to be done in order to encourage universities all around Europe to host Turkish students and also to send students to Turkey. And one of the other reasons is because despite having sent 500,000 students to study abroad from Turkey, the share of the Turkish students compared to the rest of European countries is the lowest. So we should be investing in their future as well, and gaining more competences for their future jobs. It's important to increase the envelope of Erasmus for Turkish students. But it remains an obstacle on the way, which is the visa requirement. For this, we have been discussing as well possible ways of fastening and making cheaper the Schengen visa application procedures for Turkish citizens within the ongoing debate now on visa liberalization. This would be more important in order to strengthen the people-to-people contact between Turkey and the EU countries. One of the other points we also discussed was the possibility of adapting existing EU funds, like the instrument for pre-accession, to the urgency of the situation with academics and other civil society organizations in order to respond to their needs in a more flexible way. This could be done, for example, by creating individual grants via the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights or via the European Endowment for Democracy. Instead of opposing, for example, the full suspension of the IPA funds, as it has been advocated by some European Parliament members together with suspending accession talks, what we have been advocating for is completely to decentralize these IPA funds and to reorient them towards civil society. This is actually something that the Commission has been doing already in light of the backsliding in the areas of rule of law and fundamental rights and freedoms. So there has been a reduction of the funds that was in a way proposed by the European Parliament. So they have been cut for the upcoming 2 years, but a part of those funds have also been reoriented towards civil society, democracy, and rule of law in Turkey. And this is important because supporting activities on fundamental rights and co-financing Turkey's participation in the Erasmus program, for example, it's the most important thing we can do in order to enhance this people-to context between Turkey and the European Union. And last but not least, there's one other thing that we can do, which is to exert political pressure by sending representatives to the trials. This has been done. The EU delegation in Ankara is also sending representatives to trials. But there are so many going on. I mean, not only academics, and the academics case, the problem is that they are individual trials, so there can be up to 1,000 separate trials to observe, which makes it quite difficult. But still, there's a presence by representatives from embassies or EU delegation or members of the European Parliament traveling all the way to Turkey to monitor trials for journalists, for civil society, for academics. And what we have also been doing in general is to raise this issue with the Turkish authorities in any occasion we have. Despite all these measures, that most of them have been already being introduced and people are working on them, there are many challenges ahead. For example, we were discussing the fact that one-year fellowship is not solving the issue. It's not going to be a long-term solution. So we have to find ways in which this support can be longer and can sustain the academics in Turkey to find a way of living. And we, as the European Parliament Turkey Forum, we remain committed to supporting freedom and freedom of expression in Turkey, which are at the core of the EU values. I also look forward to hear from the other panelists today, because they are really the academics working on the field. We are just a facilitator here. But just to come back to the title of our conference today, the question mark, Friends Forever, I would like to say that isolation is not the answer. So in any way, breaking all the contracts or relationships with European universities is clearly not the solution, because now more than ever we need to strengthen those links and to engage rather to close our relationship. Thank you.
Right. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation, Rob and Scholars at Risk. It's a real pleasure to be here, and a challenge too, to share some thoughts on this very complex and delicate issue. Actually, first of all, thank you very much also to my previous speakers, because they've given some really interesting insights into the topic. And I think what I'll try to do over the next 15 minutes or so is to kind of bridge the divide and try to explain how EUA as an organization of universities has been trying to walk this tightrope between necessary criticism and also cooperation. So this is what I would like to do. First of all, I want to explain to you what EUA is and what it does, because I think this is quite essential to understanding our relationship with Turkish higher education and Turkish universities. Then I will tell you about who our Turkish members are and how we engage with them. And then I will describe in really quite sort of practical ways how we've tried to react to recent threats to academic freedom and university autonomy in Turkey, and how this has affected our relationship. So EUA, my organization, the European University Association, is the largest representative organization of universities in Europe. Our roots go back to 2001, when EUA was created as a merger from the Association of European Universities and the Association of European Rectors Conferences. I mention this because it explains our membership structure. On one hand, we're an umbrella organization, so we represent national university associations in 33 European countries, ranging from Portugal in the west to, well, Turkey in the east. And on the other hand, we have what we call our individual members. About 750 higher education institutions in 47 European countries. And geographically, our members cover roughly the countries of the Bologna process. So what do we do? What does EUA do? First of all, we're a representative organization, so we try to influence policies affecting higher education, research, and innovation, mainly at the European level. This is not so much the part of our work I'll be talking about today. Our other central mission is quite simple, really. It's to bring people and institutions together around all sorts of different topics relevant to higher education and research and innovation. So we want to facilitate the exchange of knowledge, of experiences, We want to create spaces for discussion, and we want to open up different perspectives, especially across national borders. So now to my second point, who are our members in Turkey? And this may be where some people start to get nervous. Turkey has been a member of the Bologna process since 2001, so it belongs to a more or less coherent European higher education system. It's an active participant, like Laura mentioned before me, in the Erasmus program, and it's fully associated with Horizon 2020, the EU research program, and its predecessor programs. EUA has 60 individual members in Turkey, roughly the same amount as in the UK. So that really reflects the large size and importance of the Turkish higher education system with its very large student population. YÖK, the Council for Higher Education, is our collective member. Now, YÖK is the body responsible for the coordination and the planning of higher education in Turkey, as stated in the Turkish constitution. YÖK has very close links to the government, and as such, it's very different from our other collective members. Unlike them, it is not an independent membership organization. Just by way of example, our member in Germany would be the Hochschulrektorenkonferenz, the Rectors Conference, which is an independent membership organization. So as a collective member, YÖK sits on our council, which brings together all the presidents of the national associations. And between 2013 and 17, we actually had a Turkish board member who was really very, very vital. She provided vital information and really gave us an insider's perspective on what was going on in Turkey, especially after 2016. So, to my third point, I don't want to give you a chronology of recent events in Turkey. I don't think that'll be helpful, and you're probably quite familiar with them. So rather, I'd like to focus just on a couple of developments, some of them have been mentioned before, and describe how we as an organization reacted to them. So, one of the first times we felt we had to take a clear stance was in January 2016. It's been mentioned before, well before the coup attempt in July. And this was in response to Turkish prosecutors indeed investigating over 1,000 academics, the Academics for Peace, in retaliation against their signing the petition. We will not be a party to this crime. In this case, we appealed to YÖK directly, and we joined a coordinated letter action, which was actually led by Scholars at Risk. And this initiative resulted in quite a substantive response letter from the Turkish Minister of Education, which showed that at least we managed to raise awareness among Turkish officials of international criticism. And like many other people, we were shocked by how the aftermath of the coup attempt on 15th of July 2016 unfolded. I do want to stress, again, along the lines of Laura, that we understand that the Turkish government found itself in quite a dramatic and dangerous situation, and that it had to respond to ensure the safety of the population and the country, but, and this is a big but, we also saw the nature of the response directed at the university sector as disproportionate and misguided. So naturally, we had to react when all university deans were dismissed or asked to resign voluntarily, when thousands of university staff were suspended, and when a number of universities were shut down entirely. And what we found especially concerning was that YÖK, our collective member, seems to have played a very important role in these events, acting presumably on behalf of the Turkish government. So we condemned this publicly, and we called on YÖK to sit down with us and clarify the situation. So in the first step, we convened a meeting between the EUA board and a delegation from YÖK. This took place in Brussels in September, following the coup attempt. And in a second step, YÖK agreed to take questions from EUA's other national associations in a council meeting in Brussels in October. And we've had to voice our criticism again since then. First, when a new decree was published that stated that rectors would no longer be elected by the university community, but appointed by the president of Turkey. EUA sees this as a blatant infringement on university autonomy. And then this very decree actually affected our own board member because she was not reappointed as the rector of her institution, despite getting a record number of votes in elections at her university. And at the same time, we've received numerous letters from Turkish academics telling us the stories of their dismissal. These paint a terrible and really sad picture, which clash with the more clinical version of events that we've received from YÖK. So how can we define EUA's role in all this? In the words of the EUA president, who summed it up rather nicely, I think, it is not our role to get involved in political issues, but it is our role to understand and discuss their consequences for the universities, and we are afraid that they are very dire. And this very much reflects EUA's approach towards our collective member in Turkey. We request information from YÖK, we ask uncomfortable questions, we express our views, and we voice our criticism very clearly when we think that we have to. And like our president said, our criticism is focused on the impact of political events on universities, their communities, and their activities. Our intention was not and will not be to take political sides. We just don't see that as the role of our organization. So what's our stance towards the individual universities in Turkey? How do we help our members deal with these dire consequences that our president talks about? Like I said in the beginning, we do what we believe is our mission. We continue to engage and to cooperate as much as possible. We try to involve our Turkish members in our events, and we keep lines of communication open. Of course, this is very difficult given travel restrictions and the generally very negative, tense atmosphere. But we do get regular feedback from members that our activities provide them with a view to the outside and allow them to reconnect with European colleagues, which of course is very important under the present circumstances. And I also think we must be able to differentiate. So EUA deals with different groups within the institution. So we don't just engage with the institutional leadership or the rectors who may be complicit in restraining academic freedom and university autonomy. We work with vice rectors, we work with deans, we work with heads of international offices, and many, many other experts and administrators in the institutions. And we don't believe we should punish these people for the political mistakes made by their government by cutting them off and isolating them even more. Who would benefit from this? But despite everything, we need to be honest. There are obvious and very, very serious issues regarding rule of law and fundamental rights in Turkey. And in our sector, university autonomy and academic freedom are clearly under threat. So we're not afraid to say this, and we've expressed our concerns many, many times. Our relations with Turkey have clearly changed. In 2013, a meeting of the EUA Council, this is our most important policy-making body after all, was held at Istanbul Technical University. Today that would be absolutely inconceivable. Whether we intend to or not, we would be sending a message, and we don't want to do that. Or worse, our presence could be instrumentalized politically. Another example is Turkey's participation in the autonomy scorecard, which Rob mentioned before. This is a tool we've developed that scores and ranks university systems based on their level of autonomy. The first edition of this study, the scorecard, came out in 2011. Now, Turkey never scored very highly on the autonomy scorecard, but its higher education system was a part of this study. In the most recent edition of the scorecard, which came out last year, Turkey no longer features. And YÖK, who used to be our main partner in this, did not wish to participate. And I think this sums up quite well where we are today. The distance between the two sides is growing, and there's a difficulty in finding a common language. We hope that will change. Education, science, and culture are means of diplomacy in themselves, in our view. Cooperation in education and science is of mutual benefit, and it can even be a stepping stone towards democratic change. We think that change will not happen by shutting people off, and we believe that we should maintain links and foster dialogue. And I'd like to finish on something that our former Turkish board member used to say, which I think is actually very apt. She said, "Governments come and go, but Turkish universities, academics, and students will stay, and we would like to be able to work with them in the future." Thank you so much for your time.
So I want to thank all three panelists for really great and informative presentations. And I have a couple of thoughts that maybe we can talk about, but I also want to warm everyone up to get your own questions ready, and we have microphones that we'll go to in just a second. So in trying to categorize all of this, you know, when we put the panel together intentionally, I think we were thinking about levels of engagement, the individual level, the institutional level, the state level, right? But I heard in the remarks also that those are an insufficient simplification, because EUA is not just at the institutional, it's at the deans and so forth, and then also at the national and so forth. The other two variables that are in here that I just want to pull out is time, because how we respond to short-term issues versus long-term issues is different, right? And obviously the longer things go on, the more you have to think about the longer terms, as well as scale. We respond to things for a few scholars very differently from thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of students, right? One of the philosophies we have at Scholars at Risk, I've often said it at this event, is that we are not a conversion project. We're not trying to talk anyone into these values, but rather that there are people in every society, in every higher education sector that support the values we've been talking about. So our job is to try to identify them, link up with them, and ideally help them, and to provide some kind of help in a way that doesn't harm them, because they are the ones that in the future we connect with, even if the present is dark. So can I just throw that out, and have any of you found those potential allies there? You don't have to identify, but are they still there in Turkey? Is there a way for us to try to identify them? And is there a way that we can explore trying to assist without harming them?
I'll just make a start. I think the easiest way of finding still partners in Turkey to work with are those who've left the universities because of the professional ban, and to also have the travel ban, and try to continue their work in the solidarity academies that you also have mentioned. So I think while we should have the discussion about best practices, how to deal with Turkish universities who have dismissed our colleagues, and where the purge is ongoing and the trials are ongoing, we need to concentrate our work with those who are outside of the universities and try to continue their academic work. And that is a challenge for all of us, because it's not a recognized institution. These are not institutions that we can easily support financially. But I think, I said that's in one of the meetings yesterday, it's important to send out the message that we are committed to respect the dignity of the scholars who have been dismissed, who've been cut off from funding, and whose academic mobility and life has been really diminished. So I think we need to concentrate and be really creative about thinking ways of keeping them in the academic community, because when times change, we have seen this after the 1980 coup. It took a long time, maybe even a decade, before the professors who were dismissed after the 1980 coup some of them were able to go back to the universities and claim back their retirement funds and all of these rights they have been cut off. So we need to have a really long-term plan, as you say, while we're helping with individual scholarships, to keep that academic community, intellectual community alive. And what we didn't talk about today is that it's mostly the social sciences, law, and humanities that's affected. So when we talk about whether we should cooperate with an engineer at a Turkish university, that seems to be unproblematic in a way if we separate those disciplines, because the purge is ongoing specifically when we talk about the peace academics in the social sciences and humanities and law and economy. So we have to differentiate more about not just the Turkish university, but which groups are targeted and which ones are outside of the universities at the moment, and how to creatively continue the conversation with them and not just look at what's left behind in terms of the university structure.
But maybe I can push a little bit there, because certainly I think everyone at this event agrees we need to help those who have been pushed out, right? That these are voices we can't afford to lose, and we need to assist them to keep working. But you raised that interesting point that not all disciplines are targeted the same, which means there are a lot of disciplines that are still in place, and within those disciplines are people who support these values, right? And we know from the history of assisting persecuted scholars in different time periods in different countries, the physical sciences have been very important voices for the values of the university. So, notwithstanding what we have to do for those who have been targeted, are there potential connection points to raise the values issues with those who are still in place? You know?
If I may say, I think so, and it's important, but it's also not a given that this is going to stay the same way. When Afrin was conquered in quotation marks, what was ongoing was scientists from the natural sciences, especially from medicine, were outspoken about the criticism of the government, and they were also then targeted. So a small group has been targeted there as well. So we can't just say the natural sciences are safe. It changes from day to day, so we need to be ready to engage with what's happening.
And I know Monika wants it, but I would say there's a difference between outspoken about criticism of the government and outspoken of the values of the university, right? Is there a space in between?
I think, like I mentioned as well in my talk, our way of engaging has changed. This is one of the ways in which we deal with the situation. So this sort of high-level involvement with our collective member, Jörg, for instance, has changed dramatically, and we find it difficult to really interact with Jörg in a sort of equal partnership. It's really become impossible. So I think that means that for us, we focus on a different kind of cooperation, which has always been a way for us to cooperate, which is to to get people involved in our activities. And we sometimes dodge the very difficult question about values by not making our events about values. Our events are about all sorts of issues related to higher education and research. So we have events on learning and teaching, we have events on doctoral education, and so we get people from these places to come to these events, and this is a way of engaging them without maybe saying things that are difficult to say. So for instance, many of our Turkish members are still very engaged in our work on doctoral education, and we think this is a good thing. But this is just one of the, I think this is a difference between Scholars at Risk and UA. We don't have this explicit sort of focus on university values. Of course, we have values, and we try to stand up for them, but we organize our work in different ways, and I think in this sort of situation it can be very helpful.
Yes, so we don't work at the university level only. It's more related to the values of the European Union and in general. But with that, it has been difficult in the last years to really to engage in a conversation with Turkey for different reasons, as I mentioned before, because the accession process or the enlargement policy of the European Union in itself has lost credibility for being blocked for political reasons since Turkey first started accession talks in 2005. And this, we are seeing the consequences now, and we had in 2015, 2016, with the EU-Turkey deal on migration, this is where our credibility was more harmed, in a way, because we were speaking about all those values while we were signing a deal with Turkey on migration to keep all the refugees. And then it was difficult to, while there were summits being held between the two counterparts, and journalists were being thrown to jail, for example. So where were our values when we were talking to Turkey at that time? Now we are seeing a moment of normalization in our relations, at least until they announced early elections last week. I don't know how is it going to be now, but the European Parliament has normally been the most vocal institution of all the European institutions in that sense when it comes to fundamental rights and freedoms and rule of law. And now we're seeing this window of opportunity where we are trying to become a credible interlocutor as EP Turkey Forum in the eyes of the government by really trying to talk one-on-one on the common concerns that we have and really addressing them in an open and honest manner, but we are aware that we cannot change things from one day to another. And there are concerns as well on the Turkish side that we also don't understand. All the security concerns and the failed coup attempt, for example, there are things that it were difficult for the Europeans to understand. But at the same time, now we have this venue in which we can have this constructive dialogue, let's say, and try to change things at the micro level, like what we do with academics, for example. We have similar roundtables, closed roundtables with journalists, and we try to help. I mean, it's not time to raise awareness anymore. Everyone is really aware of the situation. So I think we passed that point. So this is why we try to facilitate, to bring together all the actors on the table to try to come up with solutions. We are not the ones to, because we are mainly, or the people that I work for are mainly politicians, but still we can facilitate or give this political push that sometimes is needed to make things happen. And I think the European Union is also reacting in the situation on Turkey, and we have, for example, next week there will be quite a big conference taking place on media freedom. So I think it's both at the same time putting public pressure on certain things, but behind closed doors trying to work out our differences and trying to find solutions at the individual and micro level for people living in Turkey as well.
So if I can just put a cap on it though, so without naming, are there actors in the sphere that you're working with that are from the Turkish side that seem like you can work with them, you can try? In other words, and going to your point, Monika, but it was on YUK, were they unwilling or do they not have the power? In other words, are they a willing partner in what is going on, or it's much more complicated and they don't necessarily have the ability to be flexible on things? Or at the state level, do you know? So.
I think, yes, it's possible to work with a number of people at different levels, I would say, especially increasingly more at the local level, I would say. So we do have a very broad dialogue with everyone in Turkey who's willing to come and talk to us. So in that sense, yes, I think that's possible. And we see this opportunity now for dialogue that for sure wasn't there a few years ago.
Kader?
I think I would have to break it down into different levels. So there's the YUK level, which, to be entirely honest, is difficult for me to really gauge because it's high-level politics. When they come to speak to us, it's very difficult to get a feeling for what they actually mean and how they profess that they understand our concerns, but sometimes it does feel like you're talking to a wall, to be quite honest. So they take it, they listen, but the question is whether they take it on board. This is my impression. Then the next level is the level of the rectors, because technically our EUA members are the rectors, so the university leadership. There, it's a very, very diverse picture. We have very good connections with people whom we know very much share our values. So it would be entirely unfair to say that all Turkish university leaders are somehow in cahoots with the government. Like I say, our board member, for instance, she was really our, well, I don't want to say eyes and ears because that sounds like a spy novel, but she was so helpful for us, and she really got people talking to each other. So she got us to talk to Jörg, for instance. And then there's the level of the institutions, so the people I mentioned, the people we work with on a daily basis. And there, of course, yes, people are very, they understand what we are talking about. Not all of them, of course, but I think also the people who we work with would be people who have a sort of natural openness anyway, because otherwise they would not be interested in engaging with European partners in the first place. So, diverse picture.
We had a discussion here. Sorry, is this okay? We had a discussion here at Humboldt University about a year ago when one of the members of Jörg was invited, and some of those who are in the audience will remember that discussion, and it was a heated discussion because do we talk to a member at Jörg who's complicit in the purge of critical thinking in Turkey? Do we sit with them at the same panel? Does that mean that we give them a legitimate forum in order to present themselves and normalize the situation that's going on in Turkey? I find it very, very problematic. We did it. There was a lot of protests, a lot of discussion, important discussions that we needed to have at Humboldt University. And Humboldt University is the place where Wissenschaftsfreiheit, the freedom of research and teaching, was first invented. This is where Lehr- und Lernfreiheit comes from. So it was for me, historically an important place to have that discussion. And to also remind people that academic freedom in Turkey is not a constitutional right. It's not something that's protected by the constitution as in Germany. But it is something that is a tradition that comes out of the humanist reforms in the 1930s and 40s. At the end of these reforms in 1946, universities in Turkey were for the first time declared to be autonomous. And the autonomy of a university is the beginning of academic freedom. But the link between the nation state and the three military coups that happened in Turkey is one that we need to talk about, the effects of those coups and the link between nation state and the universities. So the autonomy of Turkish universities was dismantled with Jörg, the invention of Jörg after the 1980 coup. And if we do not remember that Jörg is the outcome of the military coup in 1980, we don't understand why Jörg is changing now. It has that structure from the very beginning and the task to centralize and to control Turkish universities. Yes, there were better times, but now is the time back to the 1980s, right after the coup, when Jörg takes on this role of being the active ones who are purging. And I think cooperating with Jörg, I find it impossible. Erasmus projects, where we have the students from Turkey come to our classes, to our universities here in Germany, I fully support to keep the Erasmus project going. But the European University Association is, for me, the only possibility to remind Turkish members, Turkish university members, that they signed on as members. And at the same time, when they signed to be a member of the EUA, they said that they would protect academic freedom and mobility, which is the core for each one of us as an academic. If we can't be mobile, we can't transmit knowledge. And so we have the EUA is. I was hoping that the European University Association can put more pressure on Turkish universities and insist on the academic mobility as a core part of our communication. And I'm sure that you're in a difficult position, but if I look as an independent person from outside, I do wish there would be more pressure in order to not just keep the lines open, but to actually set guidelines for best practices and to limit some of the cooperations so that Turkish universities are actually don't use European institutions in order to legitimize and normalize the fascist pressures that are ongoing.
You know, and I think that's why we want to have this conversation. I think we need to keep going with this conversation. And this is the part where I'm pausing because I want you to get your questions ready. I'm about to come to you. So please, there are microphones. But I think we've also identified here when the other actor is willing to risk cutting off all of the Erasmus students that we really don't want to harm in this process, right? Or when they were willing to purge the rectors who have so far been able to defend their faculty. What is our room for leverage? So I think everyone agrees with you, this is a very problematic dynamic, but we're trying to not be the ones that trigger those types of effects, and I think that's where we're digging. So please, your questions here.
Thank you very much for these very detailed information, and it's giving different perspectives also. I have 3 questions to all of the speakers, one by one. The first question goes to Dr. Steinel. Could you please elaborate a little bit, continuing contact with complicit universities in Turkey? You mentioned that you are contacted with deans or professors, not the rectors, but when we check your website from we saw that the ex-higher education's president, Yekta Saraç, is one of your founder members in your list. So you know YÖK is one of the complicit institution in Turkey, and how you can continue with collaboration with them. And also, for example, Ankara University's rector has been invited, as Professor Konuk mentioned here in Germany, and he fired in one day 102 academics from his university. And the second question is to Professor Konuk. Is there any way to find fellowships for those academics in Turkey in the future, in your future call? And the third question is to Ms. Batalla. Is there any improvement in the recognition of Solidarity Academies in Turkey? And we are the Academics for Peace in Turkey, in Germany. We had also a Solidarity Academy in here, and we have another institution called Freie of University. Are there any way to recognize them as a partner in collaboration? Thank you very much.
Yes, I will start being the last. Well, we do already, not institutionally, but we do already collaborate with the Solidarity institutions in Turkey or the Of University. It's not that we are in touch with a lot of different academics, but we have a good working relationship with some of them. And we had so far 2 of these meetings that I mentioned before, and we are already in touch with people both in Turkey and in Exile who know very well the situation, but we cannot formalize an institutional agreement in that sense, but they are very well represented.
Thanks for the question. So, of course, we're very aware that YÖK's position is a very, very questionable one. YÖK's role is very questionable. And that's why I said we say this very openly. We are very critical of YÖK, and we tell them that we are shocked by the fact that they don't help in this. Well, help. They don't help. They are complicit in this issue. Now, I think there was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to say that we don't represent rectors. We do. We are, if you will, the European Rectors Conference. But what I meant to say is that in practice, we also cooperate. A lot of our activities are with other people in the institutions as well. So depending on what kind of topics we're working on, we also work with deans and heads of international offices and all sorts of people. who are interested in our work and who can identify with this sort of European dimension. So this is what I meant to say. We don't only cooperate with Turkish rectors. I mean, it's very difficult, and it's a conundrum that I really can't solve for you. But what I can say is that EUA's mantra, if you like, is cooperation. If we just kind of, if you think it through, of course, there's always a possibility. This is in our statutes. We could kick out a member. This is possible, has to be possible. So we could kick out Jörg, but what would happen then? We would lose all of our links to Turkey. We would lose all of our individual members. All the universities would have to leave EUA. There would be no links to the rest of Europe. And I personally don't think that this is a desirable outcome. So, but it is difficult, yes. It is difficult, of course.
Well, I'll respond to the question about the fellowships. If there are more funding bodies who would like to give us more funding, we are able to help, of course, more. That's we have a space and capacity and the willingness and the enthusiasm to do more than what we've done. But the one of the most creative, I think, ideas that has been floating around here these days is to support off university and to try to partner the fellows who are already in exile with those who can't leave, and to provide some online teaching, online courses that keeps our colleagues there within the tradition of critical thinking, give them access to students here. Our students here can benefit from those kinds of teaching. So this co-teaching is one model in which we can we can keep those lines of communication alive and circumvent Jörg. Keep this tradition alive. So there are many ideas, but maybe there are some other questions. If there's more money, there's always more academies in Exile can come into being. Maybe I should say one thing. We're committed to open the next call for applications to other countries. The reason for this is from the very beginning, Turkey was the main focus because the urgent need is there. But we are aware that with the introduction of the Holocaust law in Poland, there's already a brain drain that has started from Poland to Germany, and we need to be prepared for an Eastern European brain drain that might not be called exile, but is one that is trying to get away from the pressures of the states in Hungary. Orban was re-elected. In Poland, things are not going to get better for a while. So we need to be aware of how things are changing within Europe. And in Germany, for the first time, we have the AfD in the parliament. And they now have a say in how we spend our money on education, including higher education in Germany. They're sitting on our committees right now. So it's not as if we can say this academic freedom is only threatened in these Southeastern or Eastern European countries, but I think we need to talk about, as it has happened in the US, that academic freedom is not something that anybody can, any of us can take for granted, but we need to protect it actively.
And I think you're absolutely right there, and I think, when we talked about one of the variables is time, I think the nature of this panel and the situation in Turkey shows us how difficult it is when we're responding late on the timeline. And I think your point is that there are other places that are earlier on the timeline, and if we try to intervene now, that may be more constructive. We have two panels coming up in the next session, one on China and Hong Kong, one on Kenya, Nigeria, so we can talk about those. We had some yesterday. We have another great panel on movement building involving students, so being proactive earlier in the timeline. But I really want to thank all of you for helping us to wrestle through this. We all know this is a difficult situation, and we really need to figure out how we can be most constructive to those who are trying to do good. We know what is good. Doing good is the hard part, figuring out how. So thank you, all of you, and thank you. Please join me in thanking them.